Welcome back to the CSP Elite Baseball Development Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Cressey, and this is episode 168. I've actually got one of my favorite people from the game of baseball on this podcast today. He's a guy who's a CSP OG, actually trained at our Massachusetts facility during his college career, and then obviously moved on to our Florida facility when he got to his professional career. He's probably caught more professional bullpens than any guy in CSP history, and I had the good fortune of working with him my first couple of years in pro ball as well. So he was actually a really good sounding board as I was learning the ropes in an MLB affiliated organization. He's since moved on to another organization, is doing some awesome stuff. Just a really articulate guy who's got a really pensive way about him, relates really well to players. And I think there's some really cool stuff in this podcast, everything from his college recruiting experience to his experience as a player/player coach, the transition to coaching, and then obviously what he's doing in a major league dugout on a daily basis. So we're in for a really good one. This episode is brought to you by AG1, the most comprehensive NSF certified for sport daily nutritional supplement I've ever tried. With so many stressors in life, it can be difficult to maintain effective nutritional habits and give our bodies the nutrients they need to thrive. As a father of 3 young kids and a co-founder of multiple businesses in multiple states on top of still being an avid exerciser, I know that busy schedules can really take their toll on us. Whether it's poor sleep, exercise or life stressors, environmental factors, or simply not eating enough of the right foods, we can often wind up deficient nutritionally. This is where AG1 can really help. It's a game-changing nutritional insurance policy. They simplify the logistics of getting optimal nutrition on a daily basis by giving you just one thing with all the best things. That's why I use it daily, as do several of my family members, and we recommend it to a lot of our top athletes. One scoop of AG1 contains 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients that work together to fill the nutritional gaps in your diet to support energy, focus, digestion, and recovery. And this can all happen for less than $3 per day and without taking multiple products. While most nutritional supplements come to market and stay stagnant, AG1 continues to obsessively improve this one holistic formula based on the latest research, producing over 50 improvements in the last decade alone. They invest in the most absorbable and natural source of each ingredient and go above and beyond in third-party testing to ensure their customers continue to receive the highest quality and best tasting nutrition happen on the planet. Whether you're keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, it'll work for you, and it contains less than 1 gram of sugar per serving. They put 75 ingredients through the rigorous NSF certification test to come up with a safe formula that's trusted by some of the world's top athletes, including many of our own at Cressey Sports Performance. Right now, AG1 is giving our listeners a special offer of 10 free travel packets with their first purchase. Just head to drinkag1.com/Cressey and claim this special offer. These travel packets are perfect for supporting your immune system, energy, and gut health while you're traveling for games, training, or simply on the go. They can be great counterbalance to the less than ideal on-the-road food options that are out there for a lot of our traveling baseball players. So if you want to bridge the gap between deficient and optimal and give yourself the best chance of getting nutrient diversity, head to drinkag1.com/Cressey to get 10 free travel packets with your first purchase. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Cressey, Cressey. You won't regret it. Today's guest grew up in Indianapolis and as a catcher went on to 2 years of college baseball at Western Carolina before transferring to Butler University for his last 2 years. He signed as an undrafted free agent with the New York Yankees after the 2013 MLB draft and went on to play 4 minor league seasons, including serving as player coach for the Staten Island Yankees in 2016. The Yankees hired him as a bullpen coach prior to the 2017 season. In the years that followed, his roles expanded to also include a game planning role. After the 2021 season, the Pirates hired him as game planning and strategy coach. Please welcome to the show, Radley Haddad. Radley, thank you very much for taking the time. I know you're on the road in haunted Milwaukee. Is this accurate?
Stories that the tales are as old as time across the big leagues. Haunted Milwaukee. We'll see. I've not had a personal experience with a ghost here, but they're floating around. So
yeah, I don't see anything in the background, but I'll let you know as we interview this. So, hey, man, thank you for taking the time.
You're welcome, man. Thanks for having me. Good to see you.
You're a CSP OG. You were at the original facility. I know you spent some winter breaks during your time at Butler with us, and eventually migrated south, became a snowbird with us as your pro career went on. So I'm excited to kind of dig in on. I think it's a cool path from a career development standpoint.
Yeah, definitely not one I would have mapped out 10 years ago, but I do have a drawer at my house with all the CSP t-shirts as they go through the
I know
years.
you can
So
probably fill out the
thanks
entire
for the
week.
OG.
That's a
That's
good
right.
good testament to how much time you put in the weight room. But maybe we'll talk a little bit about you obviously came up as a catcher, so let's speak to the catching position just a little bit. You came up in an era really where receivers were maybe starting to be acknowledged for what they did back there beyond just game calling and things like that, but actually stealing strikes and things like that. But they were still pretty underappreciated. I know in the private sector, our big league guys always loved throwing to you, but it never seemed to show up in the box score or even maybe the analytics that were available at the time. Was this something that you were aware of? Is it something that you learned about maybe in hindsight once you got more into the coaching aspect of the game?
I think like aware of is the right word, right? I signed with the Yankees in 2013 and spent my whole professional playing career with them. Um, a man by the name of Josh Paul was the catching coordinator at the time, and he's the one to introduce it to me. I think the Yankees were kind of on the forefront, maybe the first 5 or 10 teams that really started paying attention to gaining strikes as a catcher. I think obviously, like every catcher back there, that you feel like you're making a difference with the way you're catching the ball,
Mhm.
or you can get some strikes, but as far as like introducing the value and like understanding how the why behind it, yeah, like it was starting just to make its initial introduction into the game when I first started playing, and then obviously like as I switched over into the coaching ranks, this thing has really exploded, and you see these guys making these aggressive moves to move the ball now. I remember like Luke Roy. Was one of the main guys who had that like really low stance. That's kind of what they ended up teaching. And then Yasmani Grandal started really manipulating the edges from side to side, and it's really evolved since then. And you're seeing, I spent the first half of this year with Austin Hedges, who I think is leading the world right now in strikes gained if you're looking at publicly available metrics. So pretty cool to see that position evolve. Obviously, like wishing I would have had the opportunity to be coached the way these guys are coached now and make these moves, but it's been pretty cool to watch. These guys be able to handle this premium stuff and make these aggressive moves to move the baseball. It's really cool.
Absolutely, and we've had a few catchers on. Jacob Stallings was more recent, and he was a guy who switched to the one knee down and won a Gold Glove a year later. And we talked a little bit about just not just that it's advantageous from a stealing strike standpoint, but also that it's not as bad as people think from a throwing standpoint. But I think the bigger maybe discussion point is just how much easier it is on your body. You've obviously gone from catching in games with more of a traditional stance to now, like, for years you worked as a bullpen catcher. I'm sure you're still behind the dish on a regular basis. It just kind of happens and finds you. Are you a one knee down guy now? Do you look back and wonder how much easier it would have been on your body in hindsight?
Definitely. I'm already one hip surgery in, so I'm wishing that would have been, 5 years, 6 years sooner. I remember like doing blocking drills in the minor leagues, and I'd leave the park with my knees are all bruised and beat up, and like you're aggressively like banging into the ground with your knees as opposed to this like nice settled in, just let it hit you mindset now. I actually listened to your Stallings podcast, really good, and I'm going to drop the guy's name again because I love him. But Jordan Comedina
Mhm.
is our catching coach over here, and he's done an awesome job with everybody that comes in. We've had I think like 8 or 9 catchers in the last 2 seasons that I've been with the Pirates, and I think each and every one of them has gotten better. So just the ability to like be on one knee, feel soft, feel settled, and like you said, the toll on your body, man, the longevity these guys are going to be able to experience throughout their careers, and just like staying out of the training room, like I think Stallings was talking about, like always something, whether it's a foul ball, and just like
Yeah.
limiting that damage and like the constant banging over time is huge.
Yeah. So obviously it's evolved, but I mean, the writing's on the wall that it's probably going to continue to evolve. I mean, we've even seen like guys are throwing more towards the first base side with some of the rule changes that have taken place. So it was this huge market inefficiency where there's still some teams I think that are late to the party, but the gap is kind of closed. And with the automated strike zone potentially coming, do you think there's another catching revolution coming? Is there a new way that we're going to have to prepare catchers of the future to succeed at that position in the 5 to 10 years ahead?
Yeah, and I think it's in progress. So I don't know if we'll ever see like a full automatic ball strike in the big leagues. I think it's probably closer to a challenge system or
Mhm.
something like that. That's they're working with in AAA right now. But the position is definitely going to continue to evolve. I think we've seen it evolve. If you're really paying attention, you've seen it evolve over the last 5 years. Is like you kind of alluded to where 10 years ago, the top receiver and the bottom receiver were really separated, and just that deviation has shrunk to the middle, where the guys who can't do it are out, and the guys who can, they really stick around. So throwing is going to become even more important. I think you're seeing that with the bigger bases and the disengagement rules. So as opposed to, the last 5 years when it's just like try and gain as many strikes as you can, forget about throwing, control the block like you can. I think throwing is going to become more important. Also with the premium stuff, man, like if they end up going to a drop third strike, you can steal first with nobody on, then it's really going to put a premium on keeping the ball in front of you. So I think, yeah, for sure we'll continue to see it evolve. And not that receiving will go away. You still got to be able to catch the ball and have a knowledge of the strike zone.
Yeah.
But those other skills will gain some importance, I think.
What are the things that are like, they're just generational? Like it doesn't matter. Like when you look at the catching position, what makes a great catcher, regardless of whether it's the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, whatever it is?
I think it's that slow heartbeat, man. Like when the game moves slow for you. We're experiencing a kid come up right now. Name's Indy Rodriguez. Big prospect, right? Like we're really excited to have him up here. He's making a difference for us already 10 games in. And I think the game just moves slower for him. And that's a really good quality to have as a young player. Especially with the pitch clock, him having experience with that in the minor leagues is big, but just being able to slow down the moment and understand that, you have a task in front of you. If you simplify the task and be able to slow it down and not let it speed up on you. That happened to me a few times as a player, and there's no more foreign feeling than like you're kind of spinning. So that ability, I think, is like a very generational skill of just being able to have the game move slow and be in control.
I think there's maybe like a coaching element to that too. Like I've heard stories about, you even talk with like Matt Blake, obviously Matt went, kind of directly he had some college experience on the Cape and obviously going to the big leagues. One of the concerns was like, is the game going to go too fast for him? And you have heard stories about like even, pitch calling for high school coaches that become college coaches. But I've often said that, retired catchers always seem to make great coaches. There's obviously a pretty substantial track record of major league managers who have been previous coaches, whether you look at like a Brad Osmus or, any of those guys are obviously doing it at a really high level. Would you agree? And if so, what is it that you think makes catchers kind of transition to those roles so well?
I think it's a little bit like the chicken or the egg there, right? Like catchers are drawn to be thinking through the game and they have all this awareness of what's going on, and that leads them to want to coach. Good coaches come in all shapes and sizes. You've got a great catching coach over there with the Yankees who never caught a day in his life.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so I think the awareness and the communication skills that catchers tend to have, or they tend to develop over time, those lend to good coaching after their playing careers are done. So like I'm taught as a catcher as I'm coming up to pay attention to the game and know where everyone should be at every point in time. I have awareness for my pitchers. I have awareness for all the defenders on the field. And that just kind of creates like an advanced thought of the game, which then leads into whether you're going to manage or coach on a different level. Just the thought and the awareness. And I think the communication style is another thing too. Is like catchers have to be good communicators, or else guys are not going to like throwing to you. You're going to have a hard time with the game plan meeting. So if you can communicate well and you have good awareness, you're probably going to be a pretty good coach.
Yeah. I'm intrigued. You were a guy that didn't just retire and then say, I'm going to become a coach. It was kind of a blending, right? You were the first athlete. I mean, you were kind of the Jackie Moon of the baseball world, right? You were actually a player coach
without the effort.
Yeah, before you formally retired. I think it was 2017 that happened. Talk to me about kind of how it came about, how that transition actually took place.
Yeah. It didn't go well at first. I'll tell you that. I was actually having like one of the best starts to a season I had as a player. I never hit well, man. Like you said, I could catch it a little bit. I could throw. Guys like throwing me. I never really performed offensively. Going into that season, actually down there with you in Jupiter, I was hitting with some guys and made a swing adjustment and started 2016 season swinging the bat really well. Probably the best that I had. And about, 35 games in, they called me in and said, hey, we're going to send you back to the complex and kind of start your transition into coaching. You're going to be a player coach. And with like a little bit of the excitement of like, okay, they believe in me. They want to keep me around. I'm not getting released like that. Like, okay, exhale there. I'm good. I still have a job. But also like frustration on, man, like I worked hard to get here. I'm finally seeing some results. So after that settled, I ended up going to Staten Island and was a player coach up there. I was coaching the catchers,
Hmm.
and I would play like once a week. Sometimes I was playing first base.
Hmm.
It was just to like keep me fresh. And then actually twice throughout that time frame, the rest of the season, they sent me out to Double A. I think Kyle Higashioka got hurt with a thumb, so I went to fill in there. It was a weird experience for sure, but one
Hmm.
that I think taught me like it was a really smooth transition
Hmm.
from like that hard stuff of playing. It really helped me to like learn the game, and I was able to be around some really good coaches at that
Hmm.
time. Eric Duncan stands out as a guy that really helped me. He was the hitting coach for the Marlins there for a little while, but helped me kind of just understand the coaching atmosphere, the coaching vibe, as opposed to being a player. And I was hanging out in the coach's room, but then also like playing on the field. It was weird, but it was like really impactful, and it helped me a lot.
Some full days, because you still got to do all the prep that you need to do as a player to actually make sure you don't break and that you're physically able to support it. But you're also doing a lot of advanced game planning and actual reps with other athletes. Pretty full days.
It was so strange because I would throw BP and then I would hit BP, and then I was like feeding the machine, and then I would take some reps. It was like, yeah, it was really weird.
I,
Uh, but like, yeah, it taught me time management. It taught me like how hard these coaches work.
mhm.
Taught me communication. We had two Latino catchers at the time, so I had to challenge my Spanish, which, yeah, I mean, all like super challenging tasks, but like made me better for sure.
That's awesome. I always joke that retired players make some of the best guests because they let their guard down a little bit with respect to how hard the game was, and kind of critically evaluate themselves. I remember like Middlebrooks came on, he's like, I could not hit hard sliders, like they were terrible, and I didn't have a prayer. I was guessing my whole career. I'm curious, when you look back on your career, two things, like obviously when it didn't pan out from the hitting side of things, what were the things that you struggled with? And then now knowing what you know as a coach, how would you have changed your developmental plan looking back on it?
Oh man, yeah, so much, Eric. And the game has changed
Yeah.
right along with it. Like the things that we're valuing are different than they were 10, 15 years ago,
Mhm.
especially as like a high school or college player. Um, Offensively, I was like just so worried about hitting the ball,
Yeah.
just make contact, that like I sacrificed all bat speed, momentum. My move was poor.
Hmm.
I was like just trying to hit it
Hmm.
so bad, like I wanted it so bad,
Hmm.
that it like handcuffed me a little bit. And just being able to like that last offseason I alluded to down in
Hmm.
Jupiter, I was swinging with Logan Morrison and Sam Fold, two guys that I met at your facility
Yeah.
that helped me a lot. Um, and they just kind of like let me be free and like had me stop worrying about like failure so much. And I think just hitting the ball in the air, hitting the ball hard, like not worrying so much about swing and missing,
Hmm.
that would have been a nice thing for me to learn about earlier. And then catching, just like not being afraid to move the ball. I think
Hmm.
we were stuck in like a catch it and stick it.
Yeah.
Um, more like respect the umpire, don't show them up with these big moves. But these guys get tricked by big moves every day now. So um, I think those two things probably would have at least maybe helped me hold on for a little bit longer as a player. But I wouldn't change a thing about where I am now. So definitely like some awareness looking back on how I would have approached my training differently. But
Yeah.
um, I'm really happy. So
I think in the interest of demonstrating humility, I think there are things that I would have done with your training differently in hindsight, right? I think we've learned a lot about how when guys have an appreciable level of strength, like you were a strong dude, particularly for your size, from a relative strength standpoint. I think, as we got further along, past age 25 ish, you probably had enough strength there, and we really could have shifted to train in power, or just trying to be a little bit more athletic instead of just trying to almost regain the strength that always seemed to come back really, really quickly. You spent your falls often with the crew at iFast up in Indianapolis, and you get down to us, and it was usually in a pretty good place there. And I think we could have attacked things a little bit differently. So that's something we've learned about veteran players. They seem to hold strength really well, and you can go work on other stuff easier.
yeah, thanks for saying that. I do feel like that side of it has changed, and you've done a good job adapting to how players are kind of moving throughout the season. But there is like I think for me, especially learning about how guys are training now, and the things that show up on the field, is like there is strong enough, right? Like
Yeah.
you are strong enough, and then how do we make that strength into power and on field performance? And I could always pull 500, 600 pounds
Yeah.
off the ground, but why I couldn't hit a homer. So like at some point, we got to mesh those two
It's
together.
got to carry over. And I think we're getting more, research. Like some of the Proteus numbers have shown that, a lot of that strength and power takes you from high school to college, but it doesn't necessarily jump appreciably from college to the pros. And actually the interesting one is some new data that's coming out that actually minor leaguers test better than major leaguers on force plate. So, really skill trumps everything, the higher and higher levels you go. And really the number one job of a strength coach is to be supportive. It's do enough to keep guys healthy and high performing so that hitting and pitching and catching coaches can do their job to get guys where they need to be.
Yeah, I think that's one thing I admire about your gym is you have so many different body types, personalities, positions coming in. Like you're not just like we train pitchers to throw hard here.
Yeah.
You guys do it all, and you're seeing so many different. You probably have a better word for it, but bodies coming in out of your gym, and it's crazy how you can get the most out of all of them. So props to you and your group.
I
You helped
appreciate
me
it
a lot.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. In hindsight, I think it was probably great from a catching development standpoint. I mean, you could go out there and you could see, left-handed turbo sinkers, and then you could see, bastard right-handed sliders in the same day and basically get everything you needed from that side of things. But, in hindsight, I think we could have done a lot more random practice, a lot more standing in, a lot more facing guys those first couple of weeks of February before spring training getting going. And that's something that's really changed, where we've kind of becoming a little bit of a hitter's mecca in January and February, just because these guys know that they can see some of the best arms on the planet. And, guys let their guard down and they don't mind as much if guys are getting free looks at that time of year. So it's good for everybody, but we didn't leverage it. It was a great place to be a position player when we were 80% pitchers back in the day.
Right. Right. Yeah. Those live ABs you guys are doing are cool. I
Yeah.
think that's a good place for guys to kind of start their intro into baseball activity. But
Absolutely.
I will always tell you, man, like those years and months I spent at your gym, like, yes, the training was awesome. You programmed me great to get me in a good spot to start the season and stay healthy. But like just the atmosphere and being around those guys, like that changed my career for sure.
Yeah. I think, what do we say? There's more that's caught than taught. And sometimes you just try to create a good environment and get out of the way and let the athletes drive the culture a little bit. And I mean, I was learning far more than you guys could have ever learned just by being there, being a fly on the wall. Cause I like we talked about, there are a lot of guys who coached that didn't play, and I was a third baseman until 8th grade, and that was it. So I'm learning on the fly just as much to this day. But maybe that actually segues into my next question is, from your time with the Yankees, which is, traditionally one of the older rosters, more veterans, more superstars in the larger market, you transitioned from there to Pittsburgh, which actually I looked as of yesterday, you guys were the youngest roster in baseball. I think the Rich Hill and Austin Hedges trade brought your average down pretty substantially over the course of the last couple of days. I'm curious, like how that adjustment, went going from a veteran roster to a younger one. And, what are some of the bigger challenges that you deal with dealing with a young roster of, impressionable, which is great, but, sometimes inexperienced players?
Yeah, definitely something I had to look inward and challenge myself to get better at. I think that short experience of player coaching with a really young roster and rookie ball helped me a lot. I was very fortunate in New York to be working with the older veteran players that I probably learned more from them than they learned from me. And so now coming into this young roster in Pittsburgh, it's almost like you're working under assumption that you need to help them through every situation and don't assume that they know. We do a great job in the minor leagues getting guys ready to play in the major leagues and perform at high levels. But there are so many things situationally that don't happen in the minor leagues that happen in the big leagues, especially from a catching perspective, right? I spend a lot of my time with our catchers, just kind of getting them ready from the game planning perspective. And I think, like I said earlier, we've had like almost 10, maybe 9 or 10 catchers in my 2 years here, and all very young other than Hedges. So just helping these guys learn through game situations and just like not making assumptions that they know, like maybe this guy's a pitch around here, paying attention to who's on deck, understanding like what is the priority in this situation. Is it a strikeout or a ground ball? Things like that may not be like really firmly talked about as they come up in the minor leagues. It's more just about like, how can you perform every day at a high level on the field? And then like now we're trying to focus on how do we win today? Yeah. So with the young roster, it's just like almost helping them learn how to play the game to win. And understanding that like there are things that are going to come up that we're going to talk through in the dugout and just be very straightforward about. And I want to know where your mind was at. And it's just like very open, vulnerable communication on like, what were you thinking here? How would that have changed if X would have happened?
Yeah. Is
A
that
lot of
happening?
situations.
Is that happening in game as well, or is that stuff where it's a hey, let's debrief 2 hours later after this wraps up?
Yeah, I think in that setting, it's more about the player, right? It's who can handle the in game. Like
Yeah.
sometimes guys are emotional and they want to just let it breathe for a minute, and we talk the next day. Those are probably the most impactful, right? You get the most out of it when you can remove emotion and talk through it. We bring it up. We put it on the screen and walk through the AB, or we walk through the situation. Sometimes when guys come in and it's like very urgent, as of like right now, we'll cover it. But it's more just like general strategy in the game, and then we'll do review situationally after.
That's awesome. Are there advantages to the young roster? You know what I mean? Like, we spoke to some of the challenges, but like, what are the perks that you've kind
For
of felt and
sure.
experienced?
I think you probably know this with the wide variety of athletes you work with, but a 23-year-old player is so much different than a 37-year-old player because of the things that they've been taught coming up, they've been exposed to, right? So I can speak to a 24-year-old player, especially about like pitch data or advanced analytic information differently than I would speak to a 37-year-old player. I'll use Carmen Majinski, for example, a guy that you've had in your gym that we have in our bullpen right now. Just from what he's been exposed to in his young baseball life, like he's very in tune and able to digest information really well, especially numbers as it pertains to pitch information. I can speak to him so much differently than I can speak to a veteran reliever, a guy that's been around for a long time that maybe didn't come up with a TrackMan unit behind him when he's pitching, right? So yeah, like the advantages are like we can be much more upfront with information, and they're more fluent in that information.
That's amazing. And Carmen is a great example, right? Unique vertical approach angle guy, doesn't kind of conform to your classic like spin axis discussions, and like normally it would take a career for someone to like accidentally stumble upon why his unique plays in the big leagues, but you can fast track that development. That's a really good point. Maybe a way to backtrack around this is talk about your current role. What's the title? What's the typical day kind of entail?
Yeah, so this role is interesting. I think there's probably half the teams in the league that have somebody like this on their staff. My title is Major League Game Plan and Strategy Coach. So a lot of what I'm doing is preparing for the other team. I need to be kind of the forefront information guy on who the other team is, right, from both a hitting and a pitching perspective. And then I really help our coaches and our players like derive a plan on how we're going to attack the other team, building an attack plan for our pitchers, and then helping our hitting guys understand like how we're going to be attacked. So a lot of communication with our coaches on what our players are doing well, strengths, weaknesses of our players, and then strengths, weaknesses of the opposing team, and then how can we match up our players to have success. Typical day, man, my days vary. Season long, like every day is very different. My focus goes in different directions, but typically, like I think first day of a series is probably the most interesting because we're doing a lot of our advanced meetings and information dissemination. So like today we're in Milwaukee. We're playing the Brewers' first game of a 4-game series. We'll start with a meeting this morning with just the catchers and the pitching coaches, and we'll talk through the Milwaukee Brewers hitters. We have, like I said, Indy Rodriguez, a new young catcher up here, so we're trying to get his feet wet with this process and kind of how much goes into it. The days are busier, right? He's committed from 11:30 in the morning until game time on all the things to get him ready for the game. So we'll talk through Milwaukee hitters and make sure that pitching coaches and catchers are all on the same page, and we are very convicted in the attack plan versus every Milwaukee hitter. So we don't have conflicting messages throughout the day, throughout the starting pitcher meeting, or even throughout the game. So we drill down one message for each player, and then we'll bring in the pitchers after that, and we'll kind of take a quick run through, just letting them know, right-handers, here's what works versus this guy, left-handers, here's what works with this guy. And our pitchers are told to use that information with their strengths in mind. Like every guy has a lens for that meeting, right? You know what you do very well. So if I say that attack plan for this hitter is XYZ and you don't throw Y, then you understand that like, hey man, that's not my bag. That's not my strength, or that's my fourth pitch. I'm not going to lean on that. I'm going to sequence my strengths differently. So that meeting kind of starts the day off. Then we'll head over to the park. we'll go outside. I spend a lot of time outside with pitchers, just kind of watching them throw, listening to the conversations that happen during bullpens between our pitching and bullpen coach and the pitcher, understanding if we were making tweaks to a pitch shape or a usage, how that might affect the attack plan or the way that we're going to move forward. I'll still catch some flat grounds, like you said. Like I don't get behind the dish much anymore with full gear on, but like I'll long toss with guys I still like to throw. That gets me going. And then we'll have our starting pitcher catcher meeting where the starting pitcher and the catcher are really getting on the same page for how we're attacking the lineup. We call that our plan A meeting, right? As you know, like starting pitchers have to get guys out multiple times in a game. So likely we're going to start with plan A and then we'll adjust within the game to a plan B or even plan C, based on what the hitters and the game is telling us. And then the final thing before the game starts is we'll have a script meeting, basically, where we're running out, like in an ideal world, if things went great today, here's how we'd like to deploy our pitching, identifying some lanes of opposing hitters that we like our relievers in, what strengths match up with weaknesses here. What are some areas we may feel like they are going to try and pinch hit? Milwaukee does a lot of that. Craig Counsell's really creative over there. They have some bullets off their bench to fire. So it's just being aware of where we might be vulnerable or caught in a bad spot. And then we're obviously going into the game just being available for our manager, Derek Shelton, if he has questions or as we're talking through situations, what might be the best objective move here, right? That is my main job, is to be as objective as possible, do what the information will tell us to do. I do blend a little bit of like a feeling lens in there. It's not too heavy, but just understanding how guys are trending, I think, is the best way to do it. Like if a guy's really trending well with a certain pitch, or we know he might be struggling to get to this location, it's not a zero-sum game where it's that easy where you can just plug and play. You got to be aware of the human element at times too. So objective deployment, helping our players get into the best chances to succeed. And then obviously the next day is that little review we talked about as far as like how do we get better from the day before, and then we'll start all over again.
We interrupt this podcast with a quick reminder that this episode is brought to you by AG1. It's an NSF certified all-in-one superfood supplement that features 75 whole food sourced ingredients designed to support your body's nutritional needs. I use this product daily myself, and a ton of our athletes do as well. Head to drinkag1.com/Cressey and claim my special offer of 10 free travel packets with your first purchase. AG1 gives you peace of mind that you're covering all your nutritional bases. Again, that's drinkag1.com/Cressey, CRESSEY, and you'll get that special offer. And you even hinted at my next question on a couple of points. One, you said, you always want these players to view these pregame meetings through their lens, right? If they don't throw this pitch, then obviously there's got to be a different avenue. And you even just talked about being objective, but at the same time having some feel to go off script where appropriate. And I know in baseball there is hesitation, in some organizations more than others, about sharing data with players because they don't want to overwhelm them. And obviously this probably relates a little bit to the discussion of veterans versus guys who came up with it. I think, there are young guys that are susceptible to getting too caught up in the data and, trying to throw a pitch that metrically is good that maybe they're just not as comfortable throwing. Do you feel like these are legitimate concerns? Like, are there any big picture thoughts that you've maybe wrestled with as you've tried to overcome these challenges?
Yeah, definitely. That is a constant consideration and a challenge. I was a player that would have appreciated more. And I think it's almost like meeting the guys where they're at, but also timing is so important when you're delivering that kind of information, right? If you have a guy who's really rolling, I'll use David Bednar, for example. He's having a great first half, leading the world in miss, doing awesome. Probably not a good time to come to him with like hey, we think you should change this, or how do you feel about the information on your fastball coming back? Because he's feeling like I'm on top of the world. No one can touch me. Why introduce an external thought into his head about maybe we should change something?
Yeah.
It's maybe waiting for the time where, okay, we had a poor outcome. You ask a good question. What do you think about this pitch there? So balancing timing and the current standing of the player, right? Like how much can they understand in general, and like when is a good time to educate? That is probably like one external factor is like if a guy's rolling well, it's probably a good time to educate on like why things are going great. You're executing well. your metrics are great right now. You're really getting to your favorable locations. And then when they come and they say, hey man, what are you seeing? I had a couple of tough ones in a row. I'm not getting as much miss. I'm falling behind, stuff like that. That's the time to really get after it and take a deep dive and work on some things. As far as like player to player, obviously, like I said earlier, the young guys tend to have a much deeper understanding. They're all the unique veterans
Yeah.
who have spent a lot of time on it or had an impactful coach at some point in their life help them out. Um, and a lot of it is it's very individual. Like I said, like I'll talk to Carmen Majinski way different than I'll talk to Rich Hill, than I'll talk to Mitch Keller. Every conversation is different. Every relationship is different, and that's the relationship portion of coaching, is understanding what each player likes to hear, when is the right time to challenge them. I will never withhold information. It's just the way that it's presented, and the feel and the timing that you present it with.
I think if there's one thing that I've learned in this is I've benefited from asking my question of how how big is this athlete's bandwidth, and how many other people are also trying to grab his attention, because I think we both know it's not just the people in that clubhouse. Like, they might have an old hitting coach from high school, they might have a college buddy, they might have teammates, they might have an agency with people that work underneath that. There's a lot of different people that can get in their elements, and if you have someone who has a really poor bandwidth, all of a sudden it's just getting pulled in 10 different directions, and you're driving anxiety more than you're actually helping. So you definitely have to consider what else is in their ear. And I also think it's somewhat disingenuous when you just kind of come out of the woodwork when they're really, really struggling, when everything is going wrong, and you don't want to just try to swoop in and be the superhero. Sometimes it's good to just come in and pick their brain on how things are going, and how you can support. And sometimes it drives one of those conversations a little bit more organically. But I know the worst time to like overhaul somebody's workout and just completely tear things down is when things aren't going well. It's like, hey, where were you when things were going good?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, that's such a good point. That's such a good point. If you're not there when things are going great, and all of a
Yeah.
sudden you pop up when they're scuffling. But the external thing is big too, right? Like we need to, as like an organization, like internal coaches here and staff, front office, whatever it is, like understand that these guys have so many different touch points.
Yeah.
They have the Eric Cresseys that are helping them. They have the Matt Hinkleys that are helping them. And they trust those guys, right? Because they spend a lot of time with them. So just understand. And I think Matt and I have had some really impactful conversations on a pitcher that we have here with us that works out with you guys. And just knowing that, like, it's okay, man. Like, you can have guys that are feeding you stuff or have ideas from the outside, and we'll collaborate with them, because we're not blocking off, we're not closing doors. It's just knowing that, like, you have other people you trust. Okay, let's work together to find a solution.
I think that synergy is always important. It's interesting as I've kind of worked to build out like major league staffs over the course of time, and minor league systems as well. It's like you look for people who are really good communicators, who are open-minded. And some of our best hires have been people that I knew in the past from the private sector to pro sports, who were just really easy to communicate with. Obviously, Brett McCabe, Matt Rutledge, some of these guys who have been really, really impactful for us were guys that I dealt with on minor leaguers in years past, who just had this really, really open-minded way. So I know we had some great conversations on some of those guys early in the offseason, just because you want to make sure that, your developmental plan is articulated to the guys that are watching over these guys in the offseason. And you also want, feedback on how it's going, so you can pivot accordingly. So it's true. Just communication to everybody involved is a big part of the process.
Absolutely.
Where do you see the information age going next? Like, is there a next frontier that gets you excited? I know what I think about in the context of maybe the performance training realm, but I'm curious, like, is there stuff that you see in terms of, the actual skill aspect of player development, or, the information that we're getting and how it actually translates to player development?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with the introduction of Hawkeye, right? Like, we're measuring everything now. It's unbelievable. That's probably like, it's probably not still to come. It's probably coming or is here, right? Um, the big thing I see from that, from like my lens, would be bat path stuff. And I like matching that up with horizontal or vertical approach angle, from like an advanced standpoint. And we're looking at how to attack hitters, or how to get hitters out. You look at pitch type performance, right? Like, how do guys perform on certain pitch types? But what we all know this, it just doesn't come across in the data, is that, like, not every fastball is the same. Not every slider is the same. Not every curveball is the same. So understanding, like, how do hitters approach the pitch with their swing path, their swing plane, their attack angle, however you want to phrase that, and like what shape or approach of a pitch counteracts that. So instead of just being like very sectioned off on pitch types, it's like, how do we get inside of this path or get above this path to get this guy out and get a favorable outcome? That's, I think for me, is like what I'm trying to gain ground on now. As far as like the information age, obviously with the rule changes, positioning is becoming incredibly important.
Yeah.
Situational positioning, right? Like we're seeing right-handed hitters especially like be able to take some singles to the right side whenever they want to, and it's so hard to, like, from a very objective and long-term plan, like get to where you are comfortable moving a player because you think this guy might shoot that hole, but like being able to find a way to conceptualize or understand with your eyes like when he's doing that. um, yeah, I think like the measurables of everything are creating so many more windows for us to gain ground and like help players get better.
Yeah, and then eventually we get to the point where in many cases the data's been out there. It's how do you use it, right? How do you actually take it and use it to impart, decision making process, adjustments to the training process, things like that. And I think that's where, kind of like you separate the treasure from the trash in many cases, because there is a lot of noise when you collect that much, and you've got to figure out how to sift through it and figure out what's actually useful for driving changes in the training process.
I would say too, like and I don't know if anyone's really nailed this yet. I know this is probably on the top of your mind every day, but the workload and player health stuff, man, is
Yeah.
so important. I know you're probably grinding on that with your
Yeah.
group every day. It's something we constantly think about. It's like, how do we help guys stay at their peak for the longest amount of time and stay on the field? And
Mhm.
I know the NFL is getting into that now with Hawkeye. NBA is all over it with the workload management, but it's a hot topic in all sports right now, but especially baseball and especially with throwers. So
Yeah,
that
I think honestly, you probably with a catching background, having seen it at multiple levels, I think one place that everyone can kind of agree on is the schedule. At some point, Major League Baseball has to adjust. It was a schedule that was designed in a completely different era where players were not nearly as athletic. There was probably a far greater impact of pharmacological assistance back then than people realized. And you go to the NFL, and we had Lauren Landau, who talked about kind of the number one predictor of hamstrings injuries is high speed yardage. And that's talking about playing Sunday to Sunday with some intense training during the week, but not by any stretch of the imagination. 28 games in 30 days. So I think that the play is probably to do some creative things to lengthen the calendar of the season without changing the number of games, and then making a more standardized, collection of off days during the season. And I think that would also, if you look at what happened with the NBA, like they redid a lot of the schedule because the quality of play was going down as well. It wasn't just they were trying to protect guys. It was that teams didn't have time to practice, and there were a lot of 1-year contracts where I think I heard that 40% of an NBA roster was turning over every year at one point. So the days of Ginobili and Parker and Duncan, like all knowing each other intimately, was kind of over. And so the quality of play actually improved. And I think it speaks to baseball is better when the superstars are healthy and able to play. So if you work in a day off each week, I think it could be really transformative for the game, save a lot of money in injuries, but a little bit above my pay grade, but it's certainly conversations that we have on a regular basis.
Look at us playing commissioner here. We're going to shorten the season, everybody. 100 games.
Exactly. We'll put ourselves on a campaign slogan before this episode goes live. But hey, man, we always do a lightning round, stolen from our mutual friend Mike Robertson.
Nice.
So let's go. First one: advice for a teenage Radley.
Man. Learn how to ask better questions. I think like just so obsessed with results all the time that like, and when I say younger, I probably mean like high school age, right? Understanding like how to ask better questions instead of just like focus so much on results and hit the ball, do the things that you think are sexy, but they're not really.
Do you think that would relate? I know you went to Western Carolina for a couple of years before you transferred back home. Do you think some of those questions would have helped you in like the college recruiting process, the decision to go a little bit further away from home?
Absolutely. I'll admit it, man. I fell into the trap of I want to play Division I so bad that I just like first one that came to me, I was like, "Yep, I'll go there and do it."
Green grass, warm weather.
Yeah, I had a really nice experience. I learned a lot. I learned what was important to me. It was like not the greatest baseball experience, and I ended up in a good spot, so like no regrets there. But yeah, definitely asking better questions around recruiting, around like, what's my opportunity? How do you want to develop me? Just understanding that process a little bit better, as opposed to just like having like stars in your eyes over a Division I school and like thinking that that's the coolest thing ever. Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. What's something that every young baseball player should read or watch?
Just watch the game.
Yeah.
Watch the game, pay attention to how these guys are approaching situations. Like players watch the game when they watch the bat flip and they watch the big homers and the sweet diving plays, but like really watch, like really pay attention to how guys are moving around, how they're communicating with each other.
Yeah.
What type
Especially
of pitches
catchers, right?
especially catchers, what type of pitches they're using in certain counts, like the game within the game, like try and really get into that. And then like from, I guess reading, man, I read a book recently called the Alter Ego Effect. It was a lot about like creating a persona. And I think like seeing so many of these dominant players they like go into a different place when they're competing, and like how to separate like being who you are and then like being a savage or being Black Mamba like Kobe Bryant. Like that was really cool for me to read.
That's an awesome one. I have to check that out. I haven't seen it. So, what about every up and coming coach? What should they read / watch?
I got this one from you. I think Making Numbers Count.
Oh yeah,
has helped me a lot.
Yeah,
how to communicate like outlandish big numbers to people who might not be like as versed in them as you are. That helped me a lot. You use analogies a lot. That's a good one for guys who deal with numbers like me, like objective stuff, and how to like get that to players and make it resonate. That was a big one. I also really liked, and I think this one was floated around in Yankee land for a while there, was the Rick Rubin, The Creative Act.
Oh yeah.
That was like creative problem solving, like how to be aware of issues and fix them. He's a music producer, so it's a very artistic lens, but I think it applies to baseball a lot. Applies to anything a lot, but that was an impactful one too.
That's interesting. I haven't read that one. I listened to his podcast with Huberman. He had kind of a lengthy one on there, so I'll have to go on the list as well, man. You give me a couple good ones. Appreciate it, and also appreciate your time. I know you're a busy guy. We got you on the road, so you're away from some family responsibilities for a couple of days, but can't thank you enough for your time, and also, honestly, on a personal level, everything you've meant to CSP and all the time that you committed. I know dropping everything and moving from Indianapolis out to Boston for a winter break or down to Jupiter for a couple of months there in the spring every year was not hard to pull together. And you're a huge part of who we are, and a long-term part of the family. So we really do appreciate all of it.
Brother. I appreciate that, and ditto to you. Owe you a lot of where I got to be, and like I said, I learned so much from being around you and your gym, and really, really impactful on my life. So appreciate you, man. Thanks for the kind words. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Folks can find you on Twitter. It's at Radley Haddad, and wish you the best, man. Some really cool things happening in Pittsburgh, it seems like, and I know you're a big part of that. So congratulations on your success, and look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thanks, EC. See you soon, brother.